Hello, and you're listening to Eco Justice Radio. We present environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Eco Justice Radio acknowledges that we recorded this show on the traditional territory of the Gabrielino Tongva people and all of their relatives in the place we call Los Angeles. Welcome, I am Jack Ide. On today's show, are we now facing World War III? We feature multiple voices on the worsening war in Iran, including conversation with Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs. He's a world-renowned economics professor, best-selling author, innovative educator, and global leader in sustainable development. Jeffrey D. Sachs, a professor at Columbia University, formerly director of the Earth Institute, is now director of the Center for Sustainable Development there. Sachs has written many books and received several awards. His views on economics, the origin of COVID-19, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine have garnered attention and criticism. And that comes from Wikipedia. And we're going to look for some more attention and criticism right here on Eco Justice Radio. So before we get into the focus of the show today, which is degrowth, we should talk, I want to talk just a bit about the war as being part of the need for this degrowth immediately. Because there's this sense that we can do anything we want and that there's no consequences. We have great power. We have all these arms. We have all these bases. If there's a nation out there that we don't like, we can tell them, stop it, and they will listen. You know, here, this is a quote from Policy Tensor. It's on Substack. It says, in the Anthropocene, catastrophes, including the meta-catastrophe of runaway global heating, are man-made. Specifically, they're caused by an incongruence between elite discourse and ground realities. Okay. Let's think about ground realities. Let's think about the wild spaces. Let's think about the natural environment. Let's think about communities of people who we don't know very well. We don't know what they're capable of. We just assume, and I'm talking of the United States versus other nations that are called developing nations. Okay, back to the quote. Put simply, elites think the world is a certain way, but it is not. And that is what causes the catastrophe, okay? We're talking about the catastrophe of runaway global heating, which we're experiencing in spades, that right now this government is, doesn't matter, let's just go have this war. We'll just get this war over. It'll take a week. It'll take 5 days. It'll take 3 weeks. It'll take 6 months. It'll take 8 years. They're not sure. They have no plan. But they just think they're going to win because they should win because, right? We told them that they shouldn't do this, but they've done it, and here we are. The history of the modern era, back to the quote here, the history of the modern era is a history of catastrophes with their origins in elite groupthink, okay? Epstein class groupthink. These are the people who are running the show here. People have been trying to unveil and show to the rest of us just who these people are. And there's some people in this system that's still supporting them. They have not faced the music, so to speak. There's been complete impunity. And this war is going to show us, this Iran bombing war, brutal campaign, is going to show us how wrong we are. Policy Tensor continues to explain what they mean here. Can I just say that we have a clear and unambiguous case here of not just catastrophically bad foreign policy making, but also military planning. They did not anticipate that Iran would escalate immediately to counter-value attacks across the Gulf. They did not anticipate that Iran could destroy U.S. air bases in the region and push back U.S. forces. They did not anticipate that they will be unable to reopen Hormuz. all of the failures stem from the same overriding premise that Iran was weak and defenseless, that the US was so powerful that it could simply dictate political terms to the Iranians. They simply could not understand why the Iranians were not capitulating to their demand that they disarm and resign themselves to being ruled by the heir by Israel. Okay? Basically, we need to rethink how we see the way forward for this great country, the United States, for this great society of the Western world, including Western Europe and Australia and other countries, and how they interrelate with the rest of the world, with West Asia, with East Asia, with countries like China, with India, with the BRICS countries, South America. This way of just this dominance, heavy-handed fist, militaristic thing. Right now, the United States has things going on in Ecuador. They're trying to unseat Cuba. They just took over Venezuela, and they're stealing their resources, their oil. I just heard about gold being stolen. I mean, it's just, okay, who's next? Where's next? What is this thinking? So we need to rethink. So that's what this show is about. It is about how do we survive into the future? And the only way that we, the royal we, not just me, not just a small community, but this society, if this society is going to survive, they're going to have to rethink. But the unfortunate reality is this society is showing evidence that they're not going to survive. Okay, so keep that in mind, all of us, because there's something called the Samson option. Now, look it up, but that is the potential of nuclear weapons being used in this conflict when things get really desperate. Who is overseeing this? Who is guarding against this? Who is saying, no, that's not the way forward? I don't know if anyone's in charge unless their name is Benjamin Netanyahu. We start off hearing from Alon Mizrahi, an ex-IDF soldier, giving us his opinion on how things are going out there between Iran and Israel and the United States.
I'm going to explain what I mean. There is the real war that's going on the ground and in the air and at sea. And in this war, I'm going to say it plainly, Iran is fucking up the United States of America. And it is fucking up the United States of America so thoroughly, so extensively, so decisively, that the world is not ready to see and accept it yet, including many of us. But this is the military reality on the ground, and this is not just the Freedom Ayatollah hyperventilating or being sensational. In 4 days, Iran has managed to expand its sphere of influence, its sphere of military domination immensely. The US and Iran has pushed out of its borders into neighboring countries. It has destroyed the vastest and most precious military bases and assets and equipment in the whole world. American bases in Bahrain and Kuwait and Qatar and Saudi Arabia are some of the biggest military installations the US has anywhere on the planet. These are assets that it took trillions to build, not billions, trillions. Because I have to remind you, the US defense budget is almost $1 trillion a year. None of this was built in 1 year. This was built over many decades. This is a big part, a big chunk of American military expenditure for 30 years or more going up in smoke. This is what we're seeing now. We are seeing radars costing hundreds of millions of dollars a piece or $1 billion plus a piece being destroyed in an instant. We are seeing entire military bases being abandoned, burned, decimated, destroyed. And I'm telling you from my knowledge of American military history, and I'm not an expert, but I'm not a complete ignoramus as well. The US has never suffered such devastation in its entire history, except maybe Pearl Harbor. And this is one time, one day. No enemy in normal war has done to the U.S. military what the Iranians are doing to the U.S. military right now. Right now. This is beyond, we cannot believe it still. This defies belief. This defies belief. This is so bad. The situation, the military situation, this is the first war I'm describing. The military situation is so bad that censorship blocks practically every piece of new information about this war. And if you've noticed, we are being exposed to less and less every day. Every day. I mean, 35 years ago, during the first Iraq war, we were being shown endless footage from Iraq. The smart bombs and the cameras, they were a novelty back then. But every night almost, we were being shown night footage. I remember this because it was new and scary and exciting. Now we are almost seeing no video. I mean, understand this. This is supposedly the world's biggest military power, having the world's biggest air capabilities. And for 4 days, which are supposed to be the most brutal, this is when you build momentum. The US is on the offensive, supposedly. This is when they were supposed to break through Iranian defenses. And in 4 full days of this, we are seeing no signs of American domination over Iranian skies.
That was Alon Mizrahi, an ex-IDF soldier turned journalist, giving us the version of events going on in Iran that you're not going to hear on CNN, recently purchased by Larry Ellison's media oligopoly. This was posted by Reality G Soundries on X. So next we're going to hear an excerpt from Glenn Diesen's Greater Eurasia podcast. He had Jeffrey Sachs on, and it's called We Are Now in the Early Days of World War III.
Joins us today to discuss, seemingly the unraveling of the world. So thank you very much for coming back on.
These are dramatic moments, no question about it. Absolutely unbelievable.
Well, we are seeing now, though, that we've entered the second week of the war against Iran, and it's the regime change operation is not going as planned, obviously. What do you see being the strategy of the United States now that they failed in the initial objective?
Strategy is a big word when it comes to Donald Trump. I don't think there is a strategy. We don't really know. And of course, at wartime, we will not be told what is going on behind the scenes, but what we can gather is a tremendous amount of confusion. A confusion about expectations of what would happen, a confusion about war aims, a confusion about the real situation on the ground. So fog of war is the usual simile. I think we are absolutely befogged right now when it comes to Washington. The only public outlet we have is Donald Trump's posts on Truth Social. These are the ravings of a madman, and this is also part of what we are experiencing. We have a war with great danger and complexity, and we have a president that is, in my view, mentally unhinged.
Well, I've repeatedly warned that the illusion of escalation control is what could take us to a third world war, because this war is spreading fast and it's very much out of control. Indeed, it's not just a war in Iran. We see, of course, Iran taking credit for hitting U.S. bases in several countries, yet it also denies the attack on Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, which doesn't seem to make much sense, and could be, of course, the U.S. and Israel attempting to pull in proxies. Well, we don't know, but we do know that the U.S. is arming and pulling Kurdish fighters as a proxy into the war, and There's now arguments that Russia is giving Iran intelligence, which I'm not sure is true, but it seems likely as the US gives Ukraine intelligence. And also after the decapitation strikes on Iran, there is immense pressure on Moscow now to restore its deterrence from further NATO attacks, while the Europeans talk about more nuclear weapons in quantity and spreading it around. Are we already moving into a World War III here?
We are probably in the early days of World War III, and the question will be whether it is contained. But we're already in a global war because there's a war in the Western Hemisphere underway. And even as the attention is on Iran, Trump is signaling in his not so subtle way that the U.S. will take Cuba. This could very well happen. The war in Ukraine, of course, continues. The war in the Middle East is now across the Middle East. The war between Pakistan and Afghanistan is perhaps somehow related to this. Iranian vessels, an Iranian naval vessel was sunk off the coast of India and is perhaps somehow related to this. Iranian vessels, an Iranian naval vessel was sunk off the coast of India. And for all of these reasons, fighting is across the world. The fighting is at least loosely linked. We don't know how closely linked it is. Part of American strategy seems to be to try to corner and control the energy markets. This is not playing too well because the energy supplies are being blown up by the hour. And so we're entering also a worldwide energy crisis that is likely to be extremely serious. And as they say, it's not yet been priced into the markets. This is the usual way that cataclysmic global events are turned into financial jargon. But the point is we're going to enter an energy crisis that is extraordinarily severe as well. This will hurt Europe considerably. It will threaten Asian countries deeply. It will probably mean spreading war. So there's no doubt, by the way, or I shouldn't say no doubt. I'd be shocked, absolutely, if Russia and China were not supporting Iran. Why wouldn't they? They have a strategic relationship with Iran. China depends on Iran for oil. The United States is basically at war with China. And much of what the United States is doing is really aimed at China. For example, cutting off Venezuelan oil supplies to China, now aiming to cut off Russian oil supplies to China, though the waiver was just lifted because of the chaos, aiming to cut off Iranian supplies to China. So if China isn't supporting Iran, something's wrong with all our textbooks, that's for sure. If China were to stand by and let the U.S. take over the world, that would be quite strange.
Yeah, this efforts to take over the world energy markets, it's very blatant. I mean, I just watched a clip on Fox News where they have an interview going, well, yes, any price we're paying in this war will be outweighed by the massive benefits once we get control over Iran's oil as well. And it made me think about the article you wrote recently about arguing that the US-Israeli attack on Iran is also an attack on the United Nations.
You are listening to Eco-Justice Radio, a listener-supported media outlet. Please consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to provide socially and environmentally driven content. Donations can be made at ecojusticeradio.org and socal350.org. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon at patreon.com/ecojusticeradio. Today you are listening to Are We Now Facing World War III? ? I'm your host, Jack Ide, and we feature multiple voices on the worsening war in Iran, including a conversation with Jeffrey D. Sachs, world-renowned economics professor, best-selling author, an innovative educator, and a global leader in sustainable development.
Well, it made me think about the article you wrote recently about arguing that the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran is also an attack on the United Nations. And it did. Well, international law obviously has been violated in the past, but now there doesn't even seem to be a pretense to abide by it. Indeed, there seems to be a pride in it. For example, Hegseth, he dismisses the rule of engagement as being politically correct and weak. So there seems to be almost direct efforts to dismantle international law. As you know, the Board of Peace more or less makes this clear. I was wondering if you can flesh out that argument.
Well, the U.S. government under Trump, but I would say more generally, but still to a dramatic extent under Trump, despises the UN. It wants to kill it, is aiming to kill it both through 1,000 cuts and through a devastating blow. If you believe that you are the world's hegemon, as Emperor Donald believes, then anything that tries in Lilliputian ways to hold you down is pathetic. So they want to smash the United Nations. And they've been absolutely clear about it. Earlier this year, the United States walked out of more than 30 UN agencies. The U.S. has repudiated fundamental UN treaties and objectives. We've had an end of the nuclear arms control agreements, which were part of the UN system. The U.S. doesn't pay its bills to the United Nations. The U.S. doesn't respect the institutions of the United Nations. And it's clear, at least Trump and this U.S. government, and I would say the CIA and the deep state more generally, aim for global hegemony, and the UN is the opposite of that. Well, maybe not quite the opposite of it, but it's co-responsibility with other countries, and the U.S. does not accept co-responsibility with anybody. So everything that is being done completely sneers at the UN, and if the topic is raised, those are, as you said, whether it's by Hegseth or by the White House, those are pathetic niceties in a world of power. We've not really seen this kind of brutality of sentiment, of rhetoric, and of action since 1945. By anybody, by the way, whether it's by the Soviet Union or by the United States in an earlier vintage or by any other country, nothing remotely close to this. I calculate each year with my colleagues an index of UN-aligned multilateralism, which we report annually in a report called the Sustainable Development Report. And even before this war, the United States, far and away, and not even close, Glenn, was the least aligned with the United Nations of all 193 UN member states in terms of engagement with UN processes, including votes in the General Assembly, where the U.S. almost always votes in a tiny minority with Israel and Paraguay and a couple of other countries against the will of the rest of the world, in terms of not signing treaties or leaving treaties. The U.S. is simply rogue or out to destroy the UN. Let's put it that way. And this is all accelerated in recent weeks. What is disturbing, if I could use a light term, because I love to use stronger terms. Europe is completely complicit in this. Europe doesn't show one morsel of support for the UN system, processes, or most importantly, the UN Charter. The core of the UN Charter, the very purpose that you find in the preamble and then in the opening articles, is to stop the use of force and the threat of force by one nation against another nation. This is the essence of the whole UN system. Article 2, paragraph 4 of the UN Charter, which I encourage people to go online and read, says that no nation may threaten force or use force against another nation. It's simple. And as the opening words of the UN Charter make clear, this is to prevent the scourge of war. Well, we have a U.S. president who does believe that the U.S. rules the world and that violence is a core instrument of ruling the world, and that if countries don't accede to U.S. demands, what Trump calls unconditional surrender, with Trump picking the new leader of Iran, well, then force will be continued until that outcome occurs. It's in the mold of Hitler or Napoleon or other delusional actors who thought that they could rule. But even in those earlier cases, they did not believe that they ruled the world. They aimed to rule their neighborhood. They aimed to rule Europe. Hitler aimed for living space in the Slavic lands. Trump's rhetoric and behavior is that he believes that he rules the world. By the way, he believes it at a personalistic level as well as at a political level. And I'm not exaggerating, and it's not Trump delusion syndrome. It's just the overt behavior. The man's loony, and you can watch it. He's got every trait of megalomania, grandiosity, narcissism, and it's quite clear, by the way, that the U.S. Governmental processes where U.S. foreign policy is typically run by the CIA is a little bit being run ragged right now because they can't keep up with this madness. So there's a lot of unpredictability and a lot of danger in what's happening because we have a mix of U.S. normal grandiosity, which is a deep trait of the United States. It was true during Bush Jr., Obama, and Biden. But with Trump, it adds the usual U.S. institutional grandiosity and militarism with a personal level delusion of leaders. We know this through history. This is not for the first time. It is for the first time, though, in the nuclear age. We've never had a circumstance like this in the nuclear age. And I would say the world is in a more dangerous situation than it has ever been, period.
That is Professor Jeffrey Sachs on the Glenn Diesen podcast. And we'll come back to that in just a bit. I just want to break up Professor Jeffrey Sachs for just a second here, because there's some big things happening or potentially happening. This is a report from DD Geopolitics on X. A Boeing E-6 Mercury, a U.S. Navy airborne command and control and communications relay aircraft, departed from Oklahoma and is currently flying east over the Atlantic. This was posted a few days ago. So the aircraft plays a key role in U.S. nuclear command chain and ensuring that orders can reach nuclear forces even if ground systems are degraded. The flight could be related to the test launch of an unarmed Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile earlier today. So the report was U.S. tests doomsday missile off California coast. I missed it. I wasn't watching the coast, so it must have passed by as Iran war rages. So we're going to have a little report from Tucker Carlson's show, talking with Brandon Weichert, just about what's going on. I mean, okay, Trump, there's talk about ceasefire, end of the war, or Trump announces that they're going to win. I mean, this war could end quickly, or it could be World War III, as Professor Jeffrey Sachs says. Or it could be a short World War III. But anyways, here's Brandon Weichert with Tucker Carlson. Just a quick report here to give us a flavor of a few different voices and their opinions about what's going on.
There are certain things that are not possible to recover from. And yeah, one is the use of unconventional, highly destructive weapons that just change the calculation forever. And I worry about that. And everyone I ask is, oh, no, that would never happen. Do you worry about it?
Yeah. So, and I think I tweeted about this in the last 24 hours. Trump responded to what I've been writing. And I'm not going to get into how I know that, but somebody told him what I've been writing, and he's quite cross with me. And, I'm a 3-time supporter of Trump. I'm saying
this personal testimony is something, but just bear with it.
In the Oval Office was partly was responding to my claims about the stockpiles. And he said something very specific. He said, not only we have enough weapons to fight a, quote, forever war, which, holy cow, but he said that we're depleted a little bit on the, and I'm paraphrasing, on the lower level weapons, but we've got enough higher end and middle tier weapons to fight forever. Well, the higher end weapons would be things like, I don't know, low yield nuclear weapons.
Right.
And, you don't want to think that an American president would go there, especially over something like this, where we weren't attacked, which we were not. And I'm not a fan of the Iranian regime, and they do support terror, but we were not attacked. The Israelis weren't even attacked. This was all sort of the machinations of Netanyahu's worst fears. It is my concern that if we truly are reaching depletion, that we might have an incident where a nuke is used. And, it's not the likeliest, but it's no longer impossible. It's now moved into sort of the realm of it could happen. And the longer this goes on, and the more that we run through these stockpiles, and if we start losing planes to some of the remaining Iranian air defense systems, then we're going to have some problems. And I want to also say something about the strategic side. I was on Bannon's show earlier today, and there was one of the guests was basically saying I was wrong, and maybe I am, but who knows? But he was saying that we've got local air superiority, and from there we'll be able to grow out and go farther. And the only reason you get local air superiority is because you've degraded the enemy so much. Well, yes and no, but that's just a small slice of a very large country. They probably in Iran, if they've decentralized those missile capabilities to the local commander level, anticipating that we would degrade command and control, they likely have hidden and decentralized their air defense capabilities. And that means we have to do sort of a long-term air defense hunt. And in the meanwhile, the Iranians are still combat effective. And the longer this lasts, the longer that strait is closed down, the more the oil is disrupted. And basically, the more we get to these really nightmare scenarios. In my book, I said a war over Iran will likely trigger a World War III. Now, that book came out in 2022. I remain convinced that we are at the opening salvo of a true world war. And it's happening because of our actions and the actions of our partner, Israel.
I would say even more precisely, it's happening because of Benjamin Netanyahu and the hammerlock he has over the American government, including Mossad officers at CIA headquarters and IDF officers at the Pentagon. I mean,
that one came from you would know this individual. He's a very famous CIA guy. I got off the phone with him about an hour before I came on with you, and it's scary. It's scary. I mean, remember though, Gary Vogler, who wrote a great book for the Libertarian Institute. It was called, I think, Israel was the winner of the 2003 Iraq War, something like that. He was an oil guy working for the Coalition Provisional Authority, and he identified this guy named Makovsky, who was a Pentagon bureaucrat who ran the Iraq War desk for the first part of the Iraq War in 2003, and he was a Mossad officer. Not just IDF, and he was Doug Fei's son-in-law. So, this is, our country is unfortunately not being run entirely by the United States and the American people.
No, it doesn't. You don't see a lot of
I'll
sovereignty.
get emails for that one.
Which is, well, it's true. It's factually true. The Secretary of State, God bless him, admitted that 2 days ago and said, well, yeah, this because Israel made us do it. Right. We're going to go anyway. So what about the question of hypersonic weapons? You read that Iran has them. They've been given them.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, they've got them. In fact, I got an interesting report from overseas yesterday. And again, these I'm sort of, I take with a grain of salt, but they've been right. And when they're right, though, they're really right. This one came from our friends in Russia. So take from this what you will. But the report that I received was a retired Russian general is telling the press over there that he knows for a fact there's a cluster of Chinese high-tech officers or technical officers on the ground in Iran right now, perfecting and maintaining Iran's growing, they're still building them, growing hypersonic weapons capability. And the reason is because the Chinese want to test these systems because they're basically very similar to the Chinese ASBM, which of course, when and if, and I really hope it's if, the war with China erupts, the first thing the Chinese are going to do after they knock out our satellites and disrupt our electromagnetic frequencies is they're going to use thousands of ASBMs ringed in those man-made islands to either keep our carriers at bay so that we can't launch planes in range, or to sink or destroy the carrier's flight deck. And the Iranians are Iran rather is the test bed, the same way that we've been using Ukraine as a test bed against Russian tech. And so the Iranians have them. They're buried in those underground missile cities. They have not really fired them. I believe they fired 4 ballistic missiles at the carrier after Khamenei was killed. That was a symbolic attack, though. If the Iranians really wanted to go ham on the carrier with a missile swarm, they absolutely could. The only thing that would be preventing them was if we had degraded their C2 functions enough. And at that time, I don't believe we had.
What's the C2 function?
I'm sorry, as command and control. So basically their ability to control their systems and issue commands. That's why before the war began, the Iranians basically, the government said to their local field commanders, we're going to give you permission to take command of your individual missile batteries so that if something like killing Khamenei happens, you could just start going and you won't have to call in for orders or for range. And by the way, the Chinese are using their Yaogan, I think it's their Yaogan satellite constellation to do surveillance of the carrier and of the U.S. air bases in the region, and they are providing increasingly accurate targeting sets to the Iranians. In fact, I believe the reason the Iranian missiles have been so effective in damaging our bases, and boy, have they done a doozy. It is not being reported accurately. They have done a real doozy to these bases. It's because of the fact that the Chinese are providing direct real-time signals intelligence and electronic assistance to the Iranians.
So those are two very conservative commentators who are not down with what their fearless leader has wrought against our country. And here, this is from Blue Georgia, social media entity, Max Blumenthal, amazing journalist, posted this. Here, just give a listen. Max Blumenthal's commentary is from a purely political point of view. Trump has already lost the war.
This is a short-term disruption for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain for the long-term gain.
Short-term pain be for long-term gain.
We're going to have some short-term pain.
Short-term pain.
Long-term gain.
I don't know what the long-term gain is. What is the long-term gain?
Yes, we've got some long-term gain, short-term spike for a long-term gain.
So short,
Very well phrased.
for American consumers, we may have to deal with that in the short term. Short term and temporary.
Temporary, short-term pain.
It's going to suck in the short term.
Some short-term pain. Short-term pain. We have to focus on the short-term. Short-term, long-term.
Short-term. Hopefully this is a short-term pain. Short-term is highly outweighed of the long-term benefits.
Some short-term
It's
pain for the long.
It's so easy. Soon, long-term gain.
For a long
I didn't get this email.
Behavior doesn't exactly scream.
Sorry, folks. Just trying to have some fun with all this. This is posted by the red-headed libertarian. There's a lot of people who are saying this is not a war. It's just a bombing campaign or something. This is a little investigation of sorts into that question. Is it war?
To is it war? World War I, war. Correct. World War II, war. Correct. The Vietnam War, war.
Oh, I'm sorry, Carl. That was a congressionally authorized counteroffensive. Don't worry, we get right back on track with the Korean War. No, that was police action.
No, they had tanks and stuff.
Well, the police have tanks now, don't they, Carl? Okay, the First and Second Iraq War. They identify as military action. It's a bit like pronouns, except we kill people. All right, how about Libya?
War.
I'm sorry, that was kinetic action, not a war. Venezuela.
Well, it was an act of war, I think.
No, I'm sorry, that was a law enforcement operation, not a war. Iran.
It's a war. We're doing war things.
Not war things, preemptive retaliatory de-escalation action.
No, that's not a thing.
All right, judges. Okay, how about the war on terrorism?
War.
No, it was a coalition-led conditional operation. How about Afghanistan?
Afghanistan was the war on terror.
No, I'm sorry, that was a pre-authorized defense stabilization initiative.
Okay, can somebody tell me the rules here?
War on poverty, Carl.
Poverty? That's not even a...
I hate to do this to you. It was a trick question. We don't have poverty in the United States. The Dow went up to 50,000. Couldn't even get that high. Amazing. Don't even worry about the Epstein files. War on Christmas.
The coffee cup thing? No, that's not a war.
There's a war for the soul of the nation and whether or not I can wish my children Merry Christmas.
Okay, you know what? I quit. I don't want to do this anymore.
A nice magical phrase. Carl, you just became a United States congressman. Congratulations, Representative Carl. Merry Christmas. It's March. Okay, happy Hanukkah.
This is the work of Andrew Heaton at A Mighty Heaton, host of the Political Orphanage podcast, and a guy who makes funny videos. And that was one of them. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests, listen to extended episodes, and get connected with us on social media. Today you're listening to Are We Now Facing World War III? I'm your host, Jack Ida, and we feature multiple voices on the worsening war in Iran, including a conversation with Jeffrey D. Sachs, world-renowned economics professor, best-selling author, innovative educator, and a global leader in sustainable development. So now we return to Professor Jeffrey Sachs being interviewed by Glenn Diesen on his podcast, which is the Greater Eurasia Podcast.
You mentioned the European response to this, and we see that Germany is trying to position itself as the number one supporter of Trump, hoping almost explicitly that disobedience over Iran would be rewarded with deeper U.S. involvement in Ukraine war, also for U.S. to make no concessions towards peace in Ukraine, while UK and France are looking now to enter the war in a more direct way. And this, of course, comes at the backdrop of Macron arguing that the reason why they need more nuclear weapons is because for France to be secure, it has to be feared. Same as Europe, they have to be feared. This is the path to security, right? How do you make sense of this? This is very different than the peace project that I was teaching students only 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, Europe has completely lost any identity and any sense. I would say that just as the UN is dying right now, the European Union project is not coming together in strategic autonomy. The European project is falling to pieces as a vassal of the United States. We have the weakest leadership in Europe in generations. Again, we have the worst German leadership in particular, and Germany is key to the European project. If you think about German chancellors, I've known several of them. Do you think about Willy Brandt or Helmut Schmidt or Helmut Kohl or Schroeder or Merkel? These were personalities. They were also decent. They understood German interests, but they also understood the idea of Europe as an aim of peace after centuries of European devastating war. The last two German chancellors have been out of this approach. Scholz was simply the weakest chancellor, a complete non-entity. People said that the U.S. had the goods on him so that he was suborned in one way or another. I have no idea whether that's true. And with Merz, you get the idea that, oh my God, you get the idea that this man wants a reversion to German militarism. I could be less polite, but when you look at Merz, you see somebody who seems to know nothing of modern history. He's belligerent, ignorant, a mix of fawning to the U.S. on the one hand, and warmongering on the other hand, incoherent, and not in Europe's interest or Germany's interest in the slightest. He doesn't understand his job, I'm sorry to say. His job on the first day should have been to pick up the phone and called his counterpart in Russia, President Putin, and begun to discuss this vital relationship between Germany and Russia to head off disaster and to rebuild some kind of collective security on the continent. He hasn't lifted the finger one time, hasn't even crossed his mind that this is his job. So between Trump's madness and Europe's subservience, it's really an extraordinarily depressing scene. I was at the UN Security Council last week after Israel and the U.S. attacked Iran, and there were the European ambassadors, at the UN Security Council, one after another, on the day that the U.S. and Iran, and the day that the U.S. and Israel had attacked Iran, all of them berating Iran, most of them not mentioning the Israel-U.S. attack on Iran. You can't even believe, Glenn, how surrealistic it is. I was especially perturbed and bemused by the Danish ambassador. Denmark is a country that will be invaded by the United States sometime soon, with very, very high likelihood. The U.S. will declare that Greenland is America's because of national security. Watch that space. That is basically underway right now. So you might think that Denmark would have some notion that international law might be important, because someday they're going to come crying to the world. Look how unfair Emperor Donald is to us. He's taking away our territory. But there was the Danish ambassador full out, fulminating against Iran without mentioning the war that Israel and the United States had started against Iran. I went up to her afterwards to exchange my concern about this, but she looked at me and turned around and walked away. They don't want to engage. They don't want to have a discussion. But the pathetic nature of this is really something sad for Europe, to simply, completely fall into line with American and Israeli madness is something that you would not have thought of Schumann or Monet or the other architects of Europe, people who knew what World War II had meant and who aimed to stop a World War III. They would have behaved differently, as would generations of leaders in Europe. Again, whether it was Willy Brandt or Helmut Kohl or de Gaulle or Mitterrand, you would have had a completely different idea. A Europe that's Europe, that is the heir of thousands of years of civilization, that knows something or two, that has seen war and wants peace. But this is not at all what we see. We have van der Leyen, we have Merz. You just can't make this up right now, how this project has collapsed. And that's why we're in the early days of World War III, because nobody has sense right now to say to Emperor Donald that this is not a good idea.
Well, not only it's becoming more warmongering, though, but we also see, as in many wars, the rule of law weakens. And I want to ask how you see the rule of law and the division of power is being weakened, because again, unlike continental Europe, the U.S. has strong traditions on democracy, the division of power, and ask because democracy and freedom doesn't tend to fare well under wars. As we saw during the Cold War, this was not great either for liberalism. And during times of external threats, we see governments often develop authoritarian tendencies. And we had this now for more than a decade. That is, we went from Russiagate to the Ukraine war. We had the economic war with China. None of these things actually stopped, by the way. They just stack on top of each other. And now, of course, the Middle East is set on fire. Under these conditions, one would expect that the rule of law would weaken. Certainly, I see the case here in Europe as well. We had the EU sanctioning its own citizens. We have any dissent or criticism of the government's wars is essentially, well, then you stand with the enemy and you will be punished accordingly. But how do you see it in the United States, though? Because, if it's game over there on the rule of law, then it doesn't bode well for Europe.
I think in the United States, foreign policy has been in the hands of the CIA as lead for many decades. And CIA is convenient because it can be completely secret. It is operating through a network of so-called intelligence agencies. These are not intelligence agencies. These are off-the-book militaries. And this has been true for many decades, especially if you are the U.S. government, where the foreign policy is an imperial policy of regime choice and regime change. Trump just says out loud, and in a crazier way, I have to say, what has been U.S. policy. Trump, because he is really what he is psychologically, says that he will pick the next supreme leader of Iran. Okay, this is rather startling. Of course, I have to add, no European leader murmurs a word that this is at all strange, that this is a good way to have a war escalate and continue and on its way to getting us all killed. Not a single European leader scratches her head or his head to say, oh, that's our ally saying the weirdest goddamn things you could possibly imagine. No, they don't say that. But in any event, that mindset you might think is a little odd. But remember, the CIA has always had that mindset. And in 1953, without public scrutiny, without explanation, the U.S. did choose who would lead Iran. They installed the police state that overthrew a democratic government in 1953. And the U.S. backed that police state until 1979, when, lo and behold, the public revolted against it as that police state leader was dying of cancer. That's where the Iranian Revolution came from in the first place in 1979, not out of the blue, but out of a U.S. imposed police state. Well, you look all over the world, including in Europe, the U.S. imposes governments of choice. And that means that the rule of law in the United States, when it comes to foreign policy, has always been a veneer. I find it very notable. I think it's very important for historians and analysts to reflect on the famous farewell address of Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the Supreme Allied Commander, the top general of the United States, who became president from January 1953 to January 1961. And in his farewell address of the 17th of January 1961, he warned famously of the military-industrial complex. We should understand that farewell message in a different way. What Eisenhower was saying to the American people is, it's already happened. This is already a military state. The institutions of government have already been fundamentally weakened. I think, Glenn, and not to take us too far aside, but I think the evidence is quite overwhelming that the CIA killed Kennedy in 1963. And that's not meant as a flamboyant remark or as conspiracy theory or something else. It's meant in an explanatory way that no American president since Kennedy took on the security state. Johnson reversed all of Kennedy's peace initiatives, and every president since has essentially gone along with the agenda of the U.S. security state, including nice people like Obama, who came in and then presided over several regime change operations. And Obama thought, yes, I'll choose who leads Syria. I'll choose who leads Libya. They didn't put it that way. They had manners. Trump has no manners. Trump has grandiosity. But it was the same. Obama and his deputy, who's now my colleague, Victoria Nuland, and Hillary Clinton, also my colleague at Columbia University, and I say it with interest, they decided who would lead Ukraine. In February, actually, it's probably late January 2014, Victoria Nuland is picked up by the Russians on a phone call on an open line to the U.S. ambassador, talking literally about who would lead Ukraine. And she picks a man named Yatsenuk, who became the leader after the coup. So when Trump says, I'll choose who the supreme leader is, it sounds outlandish, and it is. And it is a step of World War III, but it's also U.S. behavior. It just is the usually unsaid part of U.S. behavior. So I'm unfortunately not very impressed with the so-called checks and balances of the U.S. system or with the Constitution. We've had a military state for decades. I often think that just as the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire and the U.S. Republic has become the U.S. Empire, what is the actual date of that happening? In the normal discourse, people point to the Roman history as a warning to the U.S., don't let this happen. But I think it's quite arguable that not only has it happened, but that it happened several decades ago. And I wonder if we were in Rome in 27 BC, when Augustus declared himself princeps, whether we would have felt that that was a dividing line. That's historians' dividing line, but there was still the Senate. The senators still wore togas. There were still consuls. It looked like the Roman Republic institutions were still intact. And I have a sense that this is the U.S. situation, that maybe the U.S. Republic ended in November 1963 with Kennedy's assassination. And since then, we've been in the U.S. empire. I don't know, but I just raised the point to say that Trump is outlandish. He has this dark triad personality of extreme Machiavellianism, malignant narcissism, and psychopathy, which we can see when he expresses absolute lack of interest in who's dying. There is no feeling there. So we know that this is a very unusual psychological character, but he's on top of a machine that already existed.
Well, on this issue, though, there's the last question, that this insistence of choosing other leaders of other countries and the reluctance to find peaceful solutions with adversaries, and primarily other rising powers, be it Russia, China, Iran. To what extent do you think this is linked to the reluctance or the unwillingness to see hegemony go away? Because the Europeans, at least, they very much bought into the whole idea after the Cold War about a world order based on the collective hegemony of the political West, led by the US. But I remember this whole unipolar moment, when it was introduced as a concept by Charles Krauthammer back in 1990. He framed it as, this is the distribution of power. All power is in America. But he was making a point as well in this article: once the world shifts to a more multipolar international distribution of power, then we shift away, as if this would be a rational decision that would be made. But after 35 years of having this political class raised on the ideology that the dominance and perpetual hegemony of the West would essentially be this, democratic peace theory, it would stabilize the world, it would transcend the chaos of the past. So essentially, the hegemony was, essentially humanity's salvation. After you had 35 years of politicians like this, there won't be a peaceful transition to multipolarity. Do you see this as being the reluctance to even accept to have other powers that the West won't dominate anymore? Why there's no alternative to plunging the world into World War III? Because a lot of people criticize Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Conference, but I don't see. This is essentially the logic I hear from political leaders across Europe as well. Well, not all, but many.
Well, I think this is another case where this is a profound process that has been underway actually for 80 years. The idea of multipolarity was both born and died in 1945 for the following basic reason. The brainchild of the United Nations was also the brainchild of the victory in World War II. And that was Franklin Roosevelt, who understood that he and Stalin and Churchill, and with Franklin Roosevelt's insistence, Chiang Kai-shek, who was head of a struggling and invaded China in the 1940s, invaded by Japan, of course, jointly had to operate to defeat Hitler. This was a collective enterprise. It was an enterprise of the United Nations, a term that was used early in World War II. And Roosevelt believed in that unity, that these nations together had to stick together to defeat Hitler, and then afterwards to make the world safe. And he really believed in world peace and safety. Now, on the ground, the Soviet Union bore the brunt of defeating Hitler by far, losing 27 million people and being the key to breaking Hitler's war machine. And Roosevelt knew that. The United States played its particular role as the industrial backbone of the defeat of World War II, providing weapons, airplanes, technologies, radar, and so forth that helped this. But the Soviet Union bore the brunt of the war. Roosevelt was absolutely intent and capable of cooperating with Stalin throughout the war, often pushing Churchill to the side. Roosevelt wasn't much taken with the British Empire. Roosevelt saw that major powers, and that there really would be major powers after the war, four in particular, the U.S., Britain, Russia, and China. France was let in late in the day for tactical reasons. But the idea was that these countries would cooperate, not fight each other, not veto each other in the UN, but cooperate to help keep the global peace. And Roosevelt believed that lesser powers, the rest of the world, should have its place. And he was the opposite of U.S. arrogance. He had, that he introduced from the first moment he came in as president, the good neighbor policy towards the Americas. He said, we've got to stop invading the Americas, like Trump has done recently in Venezuela and is about to do in Cuba. So that's how the UN was born. Just one problem. Roosevelt had untreated high blood pressure, and he died on April 12th, 1945. And that was the end of the American multipolar vision, because Truman, his successor, was a much lesser person, not experienced. FDR was a gifted individual also, and Truman bought in immediately to the idea that this is now a war with Bolshevism. FDR wasn't much impressed with these labels, I have to say. He was just a great pragmatist. He didn't care who called what whom, what labels, titles, ideologies. He was going to get along, and he was going to get along, and he was going to be practical. But already in the second half of 1945, and that's why the bomb was dropped twice on Japan to impress Mr. Stalin, the U.S. was now at war for global control. The idea of shared responsibilities was already out the window in the American mentality. And this was, of course, put most vividly in NSC Memo 68 in 1950, that this was going to be the U.S. battling world communism for dominance. I say all of this, Glenn, because when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, the insanity of a country of 4% of the world population deciding it would run the world went into overdrive. And it went into overdrive, and it's been in overdrive since 1991. The U.S. has viewed itself, and by U.S. I mean the CIA, the military-industrial digital complex, the ones that make the war decisions that have brought us nonstop into war, that allocate the trillions of dollars and so on. They believe they run the world. When China rose in power over several decades, and that was noticed by the United States sometime around 2010, this freaked out these would-be hegemonists. Now there's an enemy. Russia was dismissed as anyway a has-been, useless, so not really to worry, so we don't have to listen to anything Russia says. But the attention turned to China, and we have to defeat China the same way. That's been the U.S. foreign policy for the last 15 years. Just quickly, a couple flies in the ointment. First, all of this is delusional. That's the first starting point. The idea that the U.S. runs the world, rules the world, dominates the world, can have its way is a madness. It's been a madness for decades, but it's been a repeated madness that leads to millions of deaths all over the world, whether in Vietnam or across wars of the Middle East. Second, the misjudgment about Russia is the reason for the Ukraine war. The U.S. never expected Russia to resist NATO enlargement. Never expected to be able to stand up to the United States for one moment. This is both a denigration of Russia and a profoundly delusional exaggeration of American power. Both go hand in hand. But the war in Ukraine is fundamentally the result of an American delusion spelled out.
So important for us to take serious what we're up against, and also what it's going to take to step up against it. Understanding who we're up against is important. What we can do about it? Well, I think there's a lot of things happening right now. A lot of people are getting it. What I tried to carry in this show was what is usually, us against them, the right versus the left, conservative versus liberal, Democrat versus Republican. I think there's a lot of coming together in agreement that we're going the wrong direction now. The media isn't with us so much. But we will be continuing to keep an eye on this. So thanks for hanging out with us today. Thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been Are We Now Facing World War III? For an extended version of this show, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media at Eco-Justice Radio SoCal 350 and Wilder Utopia. If you like what you've heard, you want others to be informed, subscribe and share the episodes. You've been listening to Eco-Justice Radio, a project of SoCal 350. Executive producer and co-host myself, Jack Eit, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.